Here we are at Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. Thank you once again for joining us. And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens. Notes from the language of Hebrews 11, chapter 11, verse 24. It is clear that a time came when Moses had the choice of accepting or refusing the throne of Egypt. Well, he refused and cast in his lot with the hated and oppressed Hebrews. And he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, which was one of his brethren. Oh, I'm actually reading the scripture, so verse 12. And he looked this way, and he looked that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Notes. Probably not Moses' most proud moment, and you can definitely see that he has an anger issue. This was a work of the flesh on the part of Moses, and as all the works of the flesh are, it could have nothing but disastrous consequences. And we shall learn much later in the story of Moses that his temper cost him extremely, extremely badly. It causes a lot of bad things. He doesn't actually get to the promised land as some people would actually think that he does. Verse 13. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together, and he said to him who did the wrong, Why do you smite your fellow? And he said, Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, Surely this thing is known. Notes. In other words, he picks up his skirt and he basically begins to plot on how to run away. We shall see that very, very soon. Verse 15. Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to kill Moses. Notes. Josephus said that the Egyptians from the throne down were envious of Moses and partly afraid of him. They thought due to his great success in defeating the Ethiopians, which is recorded in the Jewish Targums, that he might take advantage of his good fortune and try to subvert their government. So when Moses, in defending the Hebrew, killed an Egyptian, this was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. Scripture. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Notes. The life of Moses presents a series of striking antitheses. For instance, he was the child of a slave and the son of a queen. He was born in a hut and lived in a palace. He inherited poverty and enjoyed unlimited wealth. He was the leader of armies, and yet he was also the keeper of flocks. He was the mightiest of warriors, and yet the meekest of men. He was educated in the court of Egypt, and yet dwelt in the desert. He had the wisdom of Egypt and the faith of a child. He was fitted for the city and wandered in the wilderness. He was tempted with the pleasures of sin and endured the hardships of virtue. He was backward in speech and yet talked with God. He had the rod of a shepherd and yet the power of the infinite behind him. He was a fugitive also from Pharaoh and an ambassador from heaven at the same time. He was the giver of the law and the forerunner of grace. As you can see, the life of Moses is one bumpy ride if you really honestly take a look at it. Verse 16. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. Notes. This man had 3 different names, Reuel, Jethro, and Raguel. The last name means a friend of God. He was a descendant of Abraham by Keturah. He was a worshiper of the true God. Scripture. And they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flocks. And the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. And when they came to Reuel, their father, he said, How is it that you are come so soon today? Notes, this basically means that they had finished watering their flock early. Verse 19, and they said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us and watered the flock. Notes, Moses really was not an Egyptian, but evidently the young ladies apparently thought that he was. And we must keep in mind that he knew mainly the ways of the Egyptians, and he probably looked the part, even though he was Hebrew. You know, if you look at those ancient statues, you see that they have those, what I like to call Mo Howard haircuts. It's like you stick a bowl on top of their head and you just simply go around their head with a razor. Well, that's kind of the haircut that Moses probably may have had at this time. Quite a bit different from the Charlton Heston view, huh? Verse 20. And he said unto his daughters, And where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him, that we may eat bread. Notes, in other words, they may seem to be a bit excited to actually have a stranger. Verse 21. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses Zipporah his daughter. Note, we must assume that the Lord somehow led Moses to Jethro, who was Reuel, by the way, and that Zipporah was destined to be his wife, but yet Zipporah didn't prove to be as close to Moses as she should have been. Verse 22. And she bore him a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. Notes, Moses is about to begin his true education of 40 years' duration. Some have said that it took about 40 hours to get Moses out of Egypt, but about 40 years to get Egypt out of Moses. And in my own personal opinion, I think this was actually God's little anger management program, if you know what I mean. 40 years worth of cooling off in the desert, not a whole lot going on. Verse 23. Well, actually, I should say some more notes. Even though Moses stood up and probably had some pretty good reasons to kill that Egyptian, still, God looked upon that Egyptian. That was still his creation, and we should still take that into consideration. And I'm not condoning Moses murdering anyone. I'm just saying that there were probably something going on that really, really stoked Moses' fires. Anyways, verse 23. And it came to pass in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Notes, this refers to the Pharaoh who desired to kill Moses. Scripture, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. Notes, the pressure from Egypt is now becoming so hard and so difficult on the Israelites that they are now ready to leave. To be frank, they would in no way have left Egypt had the blessings continued as it was during the time of Joseph. At times, the Lord has to allow difficulties and afflictions in order to get us to become willing to do His will. And on my own side notes, once again, if it is to be noticed that whenever Joseph was in charge, it is a historically proven fact that Egypt's pyramids were bigger, their gold was bigger, their prosperity was bigger. But then comes this Pharaoh and these series of pharaohs who knew not Joseph, and we'll get to what really happens. It's not very pleasant for the land of Egypt. Verse 24. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered His covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. No, whenever God says He remembers something, that just basically means that He thought on it. It is not clear here how much the Israelites were conscious of God, or whether they had almost forgotten Him. We do know that it was God who took the initiative in their deliverance in the view of His covenants and promises to their fathers, and God always keeps His word. Verse 25, and God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto him. Notes, the glorious name Elohim occurs 5 times in verses 23 through 25. As yet He was not now known to Israel as Jehovah. That would come a little later. And we'll have to pick up in chapter 3 of Exodus. Thank you.